A black woman, the new director of the state police department, is racially profiled by her own officer, sparking a viral scandal. As outrage grows and systemic racism is exposed, she takes a stand that challenges her career and the entire justice system. What happened next stunned everyone. But let's start from the beginning. Detective Rachel Harrison, newly appointed as the director of the state police department, was on her way home after a demanding day. A 37-year-old black woman with short-cropped hair and a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor, she moved through the world with quiet authority. Dressed in a tailored suit, she carried a bag of groceries as she walked to her car, parked under a dimly flickering streetlight. Before she could reach her vehicle, a voice called out from behind, "Hey, you there, stop." Rachel turned to see Officer Jackson Myers, a 42-year-old white patrolman with a stiff posture and an air of self-importance, walking toward her. His uniform was immaculate, but his hand rested on his holstered weapon in a way that sent a clear message. "Can I help you?" Rachel asked, keeping her tone calm. "This is a high-theft area," Myers said curtly. "I need to see some ID." Rachel blinked, incredulous. "Excuse me?" "ID," Myers repeated, his voice firm. "Now." Rachel could feel eyes on her as a few pedestrians slowed to watch. She kept her expression neutral, though irritation bubbled beneath the surface. Slowly, she pulled out her wallet and handed over her driver's license. "Detective Rachel Harrison," she said, her tone measured. Myers looked at the ID, his lips curling slightly. "Detective, huh? Well, even detectives can wander into places they shouldn't be." Rachel's patience was wearing thin, but she refused to escalate. "Officer Myers, I've done nothing wrong, and I'm not inclined to entertain this harassment. Is there a specific reason you're stopping me?" Before he could respond, another officer, a younger man with nervous energy, arrived. "Hey, Myers," the younger officer called out. "Everything okay?" "Just handling a situation," Myers replied, keeping his focus on Rachel. The younger officer glanced at Rachel, then at the ID in Myers' hand, his face blanching as recognition set in. Myers," he said cautiously, "you might want to take a closer look at that." "What?" Myers snapped, flipping the ID again. Then his eyes widened as Rachel pulled out her badge and held it up. "I'm Director Rachel Harrison," she said evenly. "Your superior, and you're about 5 seconds away from a significant disciplinary review." The color drained from Myers' face as the crowd murmured. He fumbled for words, but Rachel had already turned her attention to the younger officer. "Take over here," she said curtly. "Make sure this doesn't happen again." As she walked away, Rachel could hear Myers stammering excuses, but she didn't look back. The weight of the moment hit her as she unlocked her car, her hands steady, but her mind racing. By the next morning, Rachel's encounter with Myers had become the talk of social media and local news. Multiple bystanders had recorded the tense exchange, and the videos quickly went viral. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags like #JusticeForRachel and #EndRacial Profiling, while others debated the role of authority and bias in law enforcement. The clips were raw and unfiltered, showing Myers' aggressive questioning and Rachel's calm but firm responses. Each video painted a damning picture of systemic prejudice in action. Headlines dominated news feeds. "Top cop faces racial profiling," "Director of State Police harassed by own officer," and "Racial bias exposed in real time." Opinion pieces and heated discussions filled every corner of the internet, with some calling for Myers' immediate termination, while others defended his actions as routine policing. The polarized reactions underscored the deeply ingrained tensions surrounding race and authority. At the police department, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Rachel's phone buzzed constantly with emails, messages, and calls. The governor himself reached out, assuring her of support, but stressing the urgency of managing the situation before it escalated further. Activist groups were already planning protests, and calls for Myers' dismissal grew louder with each passing hour. The department's reputation and Rachel's leadership were under intense scrutiny. As Rachel pored over incident reports in her office, Deputy Chief Maria Lopez entered, her expression grim. She placed a thick stack of documents on Rachel's desk and hesitated before speaking. "It's bad," she said, her voice low. "The union's pushing back hard. They're claiming Myers acted within protocol." Rachel's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the papers. "There was no protocol in what he did," she said firmly. "It was pure bias." Lopez sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "How do you want to handle this? The press is circling like vultures, and Myers isn't backing down. He's claiming he was just doing his job." Rachel exhaled slowly, choosing her words with care. "Schedule a meeting with Myers," she said decisively, "and arrange a press conference. If he wants to justify his actions, let him do it in front of me and the public." The conference room hummed with unspoken tension as Officer Jackson Myers stepped inside. His rigid posture and darting eyes betrayed the inner turmoil behind his otherwise stoic expression. The room was stark, its white walls and fluorescent lights offering no comfort. At the head of the long table sat Rachel Harrison, her presence commanding. She was flanked by Deputy Chief Maria Lopez on one side and two internal affairs officers on the other. A camera in the corner streamed the proceedings live to a press room filled with reporters eager for the latest twist in the story that had gripped the public. "Officer Myers," Rachel began, her tone sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. "Do you understand why we're here?" "Yes, ma'am," Myers replied, his voice tight, his shoulders stiff. Rachel leaned forward slightly, her piercing gaze locking onto him. "Good. Explain to me why you felt it necessary to stop and question a civilian who was doing nothing but walking to her car." Myers shifted uncomfortably, his fingers twitching against the table. "The area has a history of thefts," he said, his voice defensive. "She matched the profile." "Stop," Rachel snapped, her voice like a whip. "What profile exactly? A black person carrying groceries?" Myers's face flushed crimson, his mouth opening and closing as he scrambled for words. "It wasn't about race," he began, but Rachel cut him off. "It was entirely about race," she said, her words deliberate and unyielding. "And in doing so, you not only undermined your credibility as an officer, but jeopardized the trust this department is working tirelessly to rebuild with our community." A heavy silence descended on the room. Myers stared at the table, avoiding the piercing eyes of his superior. Rachel leaned in further, her voice low, but charged with conviction. "This isn't just about me," she continued. "This is about every person who's been stopped, questioned, or harassed simply because someone like you decided they didn't belong. You're not just a bad apple, Myers. You're a symptom of a broken system. But I will not allow you, or anyone else, to perpetuate it under my leadership." The weight of her words lingered in the room, leaving Myers visibly shaken. The press conference that afternoon was standing room only. Rachel stood at the podium, her composure unshakable as she addressed the crowd. "Last night's incident was a stark reminder of the work we still have to do to ensure fairness and justice in law enforcement," she began. "Bias, whether implicit or explicit, has no place in our ranks. Effective immediately, Officer Myers is suspended, pending a full review." A reporter raised a hand. Director Harrison, how do you respond to claims that this was a misuse of your authority? Rachel met the question head-on. I didn't misuse my authority. I exercised it to correct a wrong. If holding my officers accountable makes me a target, so be it. The crowd erupted in applause as Rachel stepped away from the podium. Back at her office, she sat down with Lopez, exhaustion creeping in. You handled that perfectly, Lopez said. Rachel sighed. It's a small victory in a long fight, but maybe it's enough to start real change. That night, as Rachel finally drove home, she passed the spot where the incident had occurred. The street was quiet, the flickering light now fixed. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile. Change was slow, but it was happening, and she was determined to see it through.